I sent an anonymous stranger a photo of my black eye at 2:14 a.m. 3 days later. My stepfather's business partner filed an emergency audit on Callaway Restorations, the company my father built before my stepfather took it from him. I never gave the stranger my name, and I never gave him the company's name either. I keep telling myself that's a coincidence. I don't believe it, not even a little. My father built Callaway Restorations out of a truck with a cracked windshield and $40,000 he borrowed against a house he didn't own yet. Walter Callaway, 26 years old, driving through Savannah's historic district with business cards he'd printed himself, knocking on doors where the plaster was falling out of the ceilings, telling homeowners he could save what everyone else wanted to gut. He kept one business partner his whole life. Dennis Ashworth put in $15,000 nobody else believed in and asked for nothing but 15%, and his name on the trucks. Ashworth and Callaway gold letters, driver's side door, 18 years. My father died 6 years ago, a heart on a stairwell landing in a half-gutted church on Bull Street, alone on a Tuesday at 11 in the morning. I was 20. I took the call in the middle of a chemistry lab and set the receiver down so carefully afterward, like the news might not be true yet if I didn't drop anything. 2 years later, my mother married Richard Voss. Richard used to subcontract for my father, framing crews mostly, precise with a level and precise with a dollar. Charming at dinner, the kind of man who remembers a waiter's name and uses it twice so you notice him noticing. He folded himself into our house, our company, and our lives so gradually that by the time I understood what he'd taken, he'd already had it for a year. He was named co-executor of my father's estate to help my mother through the grief. He was voted onto the board temporarily. He had majority operational control inside 18 months of the wedding, and the trucks got repainted before the quarter was out. Callaway Restorations, navy and gold. No Ashworth anywhere. He kept my father's name. It tested well with clients. He dropped Dennis's 'cause a name on a truck is a claim, and Richard doesn't like other people holding claims in a house he's decided belongs to him. I still have one room he's never managed to fully take though. Above the old carriage house, behind the main house, there's a workshop my father built with his own hands the year I turned 12. It's the only square footage on that property Richard has never once entered without me standing there watching him do it. That's where I fix clocks. My father collected them, Mantel clocks, a ship's chronometer, a Vienna regulator with a hairline crack in the glass he kept meaning to replace and never did. After he died, I taught myself to open the cases instead of just dusting them. There's a logic to a broken movement that nothing else in my life has given me since. You find the exact part that's worn down, you replace exactly that part. You leave everything else alone. He taught me on a cheap wind-up alarm clock first, the kind you can ruin without feeling bad about it. Righty-tighty isn't a law of physics, it's just a habit somebody built into your hands. Question everything, especially the parts that feel obvious. I didn't understand until years later that he wasn't really talking about clocks. He used to say the same thing about every building the company ever touched. Always shoot the before. Nobody believes the after without it. He meant it about water damage and rotted joists, photograph the wreck, because a client who never sees how bad it was will never understand what you saved. I do the same thing with clocks now out of habit. Full documentation, time-stamped every job before and after. There's a water stain on the workshop ceiling near the north window I patched myself 2 winters ago, and I photographed it before I touched it, the way I photograph everything, and never thought about that picture again after I filed it. It's going to matter more than I know yet. Richard calls that workshop a waste of space. He's said it at the dinner table at least 4 times, always in his reasonable man voice, the one he uses right before he says something unforgivable, and expects you to thank him for his honesty. That whole carriage house is wasted space with your name on it, Emma. Prime lot. We could subdivide, put in a second driveway. He says it like weather. He said a version of it about me too, in worse moods, with the door already shut behind whoever else might have overheard. You'd be nothing without this family, Emma. Don't ever forget who decided to keep you around. I was 22 the first time he said that to me, and I remember thinking, distantly, that I should probably be angrier than I was. My mother has a version of it she says with her eyes instead of her mouth. He put my name on the company insurance and my car registration and then found reasons to bring both up whenever I mentioned wanting anything that wasn't already his idea. He checked the mileage. He asked casually who I'd been talking to when my phone bill showed more texts than usual, and made it sound like curiosity instead of an audit. I stopped mentioning Priya's name around him first, and then I mostly stopped seeing her at all, because every visit turned into 3 days of him asking pointed questions dressed up as concern. It's easier, I told myself, to just have fewer things worth asking about. I didn't call it control. I called it Richard being Richard, the way you rename a bruise a clumsy accident so you don't have to look directly at how it got there. I met the person who's about to blow this whole family open 2 years ago, in a watch and clock forum with maybe 4,000 members and a chat channel that never really sleeps. He posted a photo of a broken fusee chain on an English bracket clock, asking if anyone had sourced replacement links for under $300. I had. We started out talking about gear ratios and somehow never really stopped talking at all. His screen name is Meridian. I don't know his real name, I don't know his face. I know he does something with numbers all day that makes his eyes hurt, and that restoration work, his word, even for watches, is the only part of his day where the numbers finally sit still and behave. Chasing decimals for 8 hours and then coming home to something that just needs the right part in the right place, he told me once. It's the only honest math I do all day. I know he's protective in a way that showed up almost immediately, long before I'd given him any real reason to be. If you were ever actually in danger, he told me early on, after I mentioned offhand that my stepfather had a temper, I'd have someone at your door before you finished the sentence. I mean that, not a figure of speech. I laughed it off, told him he was being dramatic about a man who mostly just yells. I don't do dramatic, he wrote back, I do specific. I told him about the tools once, the ones in the workshop stamped with 2 worn smooth letters on the handles. ANC, I told him. My dad's old business, before my stepfather scrubbed the name off every truck we own. I didn't think anything of saying it. It's just a detail, the kind of thing you hand someone who already knows the shape of your life. He went quiet a beat longer than usual before he answered. I didn't think anything of that either. The trouble with Richard is that he's never once been cruel in a way you could put in an email to HR. He's cruel in the cumulative, specific way that only the person absorbing it can ever actually prove happened at all. 3 months ago, the Savannah Morning News ran a full spread on our restoration of the Whitfield Exchange building downtown, a Greek revival warehouse I spent 14 months on personally, hand-carving replacement work off 4 surviving original inches, matching the acanthus pattern by eye, because there were no drawings left to copy from. The article credited the Callaway Restorations design team, led by VP Vanessa Voss. Vanessa's title is real. Her involvement in that project was one site visit, a hard hat she wore for the photographs, and a lot of standing near me while I explained things to a reporter who kept looking at her instead of me. Richard framed the article and hung it in the office lobby, gold frame, eye level, first thing anyone sees walking in. When I asked him about it, carefully, the way you learn to ask him things, in private, no audience to perform for, he told me I was being small. Vanessa represents the company at that level, Emma. That's what the title's for. You do beautiful work, nobody's saying otherwise. The reasonable voice sliding. But this family doesn't need 2 people competing for the same spotlight. It's a waste of energy, kind of like that workshop's a waste of space. There it was again, waste of space, like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. Vanessa put it more plainly a few nights later, in the kitchen, not troubling to lower her voice for my mother 2 rooms away. Some of us actually earned our name on that building, Em. You just held the tools. I held the tools for 14 months. I held them until my hands cramped into the shape of a chisel and stayed that way in my sleep. I said none of that out loud. I've learned that arguing with either of them in the moment just gives them a longer runway to land the same point twice harder. A homeowner on Habersham Street cried in her own foyer the day I finished restoring her grandmother's staircase, actually cried, gripping my arm like she needed to make sure I was real. You gave me my whole childhood back, she told me. I get to walk down these stairs and be 9 years old again every single day now. I drove home that afternoon feeling 10 feet tall, and by dinner Richard had found a way to make it about invoicing efficiency instead. That Christmas, the companies, not the families, the big catered one at the Whitfield building lobby, under Vanessa's framed headline, Richard stood up with a glass of champagne and announced Vanessa's well-deserved promotion to senior VP, and handed her a small wrapped box that turned out to be a watch, a real one, the kind with a name on the dial that means something to people who care about names on dials. He handed me an envelope, a gift card, $40 to a home goods store 2 towns over I'd never once mentioned shopping at. I thanked him. I want that on the record somewhere. I said thank you and smiled, and put the envelope in my coat pocket, and went home and cried in the workshop until one of the clocks striking the hour startled me into stopping. I told Meridian about it that night, typing faster than I meant to. A gift card, he wrote back. Not a question. A demand for confirmation, like he was giving Richard one chance to have not actually done that. $40, I told him. She got a watch with an actual name on it. Send me a photo, he said, of the card, not the watch. I did. I don't know why that felt significant at the time. I sent him things constantly, funny customer reviews, screenshots of finished repairs, my whole ordinary life in small unremarkable pieces. This was just one more piece. He was quiet for almost 10 minutes. I have some experience with people who put other people's names on things they didn't build, he wrote finally. It doesn't stay buried forever, it just takes documentation. I didn't ask him what he meant by experience. I wish, now, that I had asked him that night instead of 3 weeks later. In February, I asked Richard for 3 days off to visit a horology symposium in Charleston, a 2-hour drive, a hotel already comped through the forum. He said no before I finished the sentence. Company's stretched thin right now, Emma, we need you here. Vanessa took a long weekend in Aspen 4 days later. Nobody asked her to explain the company's staffing needs first. I told Meridian I wasn't going to make it after all. He didn't say anything for a minute, and then he sent me a photo instead, an actual photo, the first one he'd ever sent me. Just his hands close up, turning a tiny screwdriver inside the open case of a pocket watch, a strip of green felt underneath to catch anything that dropped. Since you can't come to the symposium, he wrote, the symposium can come to you badly, one photo at a time. He sent me 4 more that week, his workbench. A loop balanced on a stack of parts catalogs, a cat, unnamed, unexplained, sitting directly on top of a half-disassembled clock movement, like it'd personally been hired to supervise. I still don't know what his face looks like. I know the exact grain of the wood on his workbench, the specific brand of tweezers he prefers, the way he lines up his tools left to right by size before he starts anything, the same compulsive tidiness I have. It was the closest thing to being somewhere else that I had. That whole spring, I took it. There was a night, a few weeks before any of this, when he called instead of typing, the first and only time either of us had risked an actual voice. He didn't say much. He hummed along, off-key, to whatever was playing low behind him, and told me about a case that'd gone sideways at work that day, careful never to name names or numbers. I fell asleep on the workshop floor, with the phone still warm against my ear. I woke up to a single text, go to bed properly. I'll still be here tomorrow. I believed him. I still don't know why that surprised me as much as it did. Richard announced the open house for the Whitfield building for the 2nd week of October. Donors, City Council, a promised write-up in a regional preservation magazine, the kind of event where he'd stand in the doorway shaking hands like he'd carved the cornices himself. 2 weeks out, he decided the whole property needed to be presentable, which turned out to mean he wanted the carriage house gone before anybody with a camera got near the east lawn. It's an eyesore from that angle, he told me, like the workshop had personally embarrassed him in public. I've got a buyer circling a lot subdivision already. We'll clear it out right after the open house. Might as well get something useful out of that square footage. Something useful. Like 18 years of my father's handwriting on invoice stubs, still filed in a drawer up there, was also just wasted space. I didn't argue with him directly. I went up to the workshop that night and told Meridian instead, and he asked me something strange, almost sideways, the kind of question I didn't understand the shape of yet. Would you ever actually leave, he wrote, not run from something, I mean really leave. Start over somewhere he can't reach. Where would I even go? I don't know yet, he wrote. I might be coming to Savannah for work actually. There's a project I've been circling for a while now. A pause I could somehow feel through the screen. Might finally be time. I didn't ask what kind of work. It didn't occur to me yet that it mattered. Around the same time, an invoice landed on my desk that wasn't supposed to. A supplier invoice for reclaimed heart pine flooring, $41,000, from a vendor called Coastal Heritage Supply, billed against a job I'd personally sourced materials for myself 2 months earlier. I remembered exactly what we'd used, exactly who we'd bought it from. It wasn't Coastal Heritage Supply. I'd never heard the name in 4 years at this company. I sat with that invoice for 11 minutes before I put it back exactly where I'd found it and told no one. I told myself it was a clerical error. What I actually felt was smaller and much less forgivable than confusion. I was afraid of what happened to me if I turned out to be right. I'd watched Richard fire a project manager 2 years earlier for asking too many questions about vendor relationships. I still don't know what that man actually asked. I know he didn't work there anymore by the following Monday, and nobody was ever told why, and nobody asked twice. I noticed something else that week too, small enough that I almost didn't file it away at all. Vanessa, at her desk, signing a stack of vendor authorization forms Richard had dropped in front of her without reading a single line, the way you sign a birthday card. Just initial where the tabs are, he told her, already walking away. She did, she always did. I remember thinking distantly that her signature was worth more to him than her opinion ever was, and not understanding yet how literally that was true. There was a night in August when Richard slammed his hand flat on the dinner table hard enough to rattle the plates, over something as small as me disagreeing about which contractor to use on a bid. My mother didn't flinch. She reached over, calm as anything, and straightened the salt shaker he'd knocked crooked, like that was the part of the moment that needed fixing. I remember thinking, even then, that I understood exactly how much protection I could expect from that direction, and it wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't much. The night everything actually broke wasn't even really about the workshop or Meridian or the invoice. It started over a phone. I'd had a strange feeling all that day, the kind I'd learned not to ignore anymore, the air in the house gone thin and careful the way it does right before something happens. My mother had barely spoken at dinner. Richard had barely eaten. Richard came up the carriage house stairs at 11 that night, first time in months, because my mother had mentioned, in passing over dinner, that I'd been on my phone a lot lately, up in that workshop later than she'd like. He didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. He just wanted the phone, the way he wants everything that was never officially his but that he's decided he's owed anyway. I didn't hand it over. Emma, just my name first, the way he says it right before things go wrong, give me the phone. It's mine, Richard. Everything in this house is mine to ask about. You'd do well to remember whose name is on the deed. My father's name should be on the deed. I don't fully know what made me say it. 4 years of not saying it, and it came out anyway, flat and quiet, and something in his face actually changed for the first time I could remember. Not anger exactly, something colder underneath the anger, something that had clearly been sitting there the whole time waiting for permission. I want to write down exactly what happened next and find I can only manage it in pieces. His hand closed around my wrist hard enough to leave a mark by morning. I pulled back too fast. His arm came around before I could get clear of it, and then I was on the floor of my father's workshop with my ear ringing, and the left side of my face, already starting to swell, and Richard was standing over me in the reasonable man voice, telling me I'd made him do that. Telling me to think hard about what I'd say to my mother in the morning, because he'd already know if I got it wrong. He left. I don't remember him leaving, exactly. I remember the sound of the door at the bottom of the stairs and then just the clocks, a dozen of them, all slightly out of sync, all still going. I sat on the floor for a long time, long enough that my hands stopped shaking before my face did. At 2:14 in the morning, I took a photo of it, not for anyone at first. Just because always shoot the before, I guess, even when the before is your own face and there's no after you can picture yet. Then I sent it to a stranger on the internet whose real name I didn't know, because he was the one person I could think of who would believe me without making me explain it first. His reply came back in under a minute. Where are you right now exactly? The workshop. Is the door locked? Yes. Keep it locked, I'm not going anywhere, talk to me. All of it, whatever order it comes out in. I typed for 20 minutes straight, more than I'd ever told him at once, the invoice, the gift card, Vanessa's watch, the fired project manager nobody ever explained, the buyer circling the lot, all of it pouring out of order, the way things come out when you've been holding your breath for 4 years and finally stop. Somewhere in the middle of it, half hysterical, typing faster than I was thinking, I wrote, and now he wants the whole carriage house gone before the open house. Like it's not the last place with my dad's actual handwriting still in a drawer. Like it's not the last place with our real name on anything. Half the tools up here still say A and C on the handle, and he doesn't even remember we used to be Ashworth Callaway before he scrubbed it off every truck we own. He didn't answer for 4 minutes. Longest 4 minutes of that whole night, including the part on the floor. When he finally came back, it was one line. Emma, I need your last name, right now. I told him, I don't fully know why. Some part of me had already sensed something was about to break open, and I think I wanted to be the one who broke it, for once, instead of the one it just happened to. He didn't answer for 11 minutes. When he did, all he wrote was, "I need to call my father. Don't go anywhere tonight. I'll explain everything, I swear to you I will. Just don't go anywhere." I didn't know yet that his father's name was Ashworth. 200 miles away, in an apartment with the blinds still drawn against a sun that hadn't come up, Julian Ashworth read the words Ashworth Calloway 3 times before he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in almost a year. His father answered on the second ring, the way he always did lately, like he'd been sitting by the phone for 6 years waiting for a reason to pick it up. "Dad, I need you to tell me you're sitting down." Dennis Ashworth had spent 6 years quietly certain something was wrong with the company he'd co-founded, and 4 of those years too grief-flattened to do more than watch the trucks change color from a distance he told himself was respectful. He and Walter Calloway had shared a single desk for the first 2 years of the business, before either of them could afford a second one, and Dennis still kept a photo of the two of them somewhere in his wallet, younger and paint-splattered and certain of nothing except each other. He listened to his son describe a black eye, a carriage house full of paper records somebody wanted cleared out before an open house, an invoice from a company called Coastal Heritage Supply, and a set of tools stamped with 2 letters that hadn't been on a truck in years. By the end of it his voice had gone very quiet and very steady, the voice of a man being handed the one thing he'd finally stopped expecting to get. "Say her name again," he said. "Emma Calloway." Dennis didn't say anything for a long moment. "Walter's girl?" "Yeah, Dad, Walter's girl." "Get the emergency audit petition drafted tonight," Dennis said. "I don't care what time it is, call Marguerite Holt at home if you have to. We've had standing under that trust for 6 years and I let it sit in a drawer, because I didn't want to believe what it would mean if I used it. I'm done not believing it. I didn't wait on either of them to act for me though, and I want that on the record too." The next morning, before I knew anything about a petition or a trust clause, I drove myself to the Savannah Police Department with the photo still on my phone and gave a statement to a detective named Marlene Ferris. She asked careful, specific questions and wrote down my answers without once making her face do anything I had to manage on top of everything else. "You did the right thing coming in," she told me when I was finished. "Most people wait a lot longer than you did." I hadn't cried in front of a stranger in years. I cried in front of her, and she let me and didn't rush any part of it. The petition went in 2 mornings later, filed under a clause in my father's estate trust that neither Vanessa nor I had ever once been told existed, a provision naming Dennis Ashworth Trust Protector, empowered to demand an independent forensic review upon credible evidence of malfeasance or harm to the beneficiary affecting company governance. My father, it turned out, had never fully trusted anyone with total, unchecked control of what he'd built. Not even the man my mother would go on to marry 4 years after his funeral. Richard's first move wasn't panic, it was theater. He called an emergency family meeting at the dinner table like a man about to deliver difficult but noble news, and told my mother and Vanessa that Dennis Ashworth, grieving, hadn't set foot in an office in 5 years, was staging a hostile takeover dressed up as concern, using some manufactured story about my mental health that he tried out 2 different ways over the course of one dinner, watching our faces to see which version landed better. My mother's expression did something I'll remember for a long time. Not disbelief exactly, calculation. She was working out which version of the story let her keep sleeping in the bed she was sleeping in. "Emma," she said finally carefully, not quite looking at me, "did you say something to someone? Exaggerate maybe, without meaning to?" I looked at the last faint yellow-green edge of the bruise I'd covered with makeup that morning and said nothing at all. It was the loudest nothing I have ever said in my life. Richard's attorney got the petition temporarily stayed within 48 hours on a standing technicality, arguing Dennis hadn't met the harm threshold with sufficient evidence. A photo sent to an anonymous stranger online, his filing said, was hearsay uncorroborated and quite possibly fabricated for leverage in an unrelated business dispute. For 1 full day it looked like it was actually going to work. Richard found me in the kitchen the next morning and stood too close while he poured his coffee, close enough that I had to choose between stepping back and letting him see that I wanted to. "You understand this ends badly for you," he said, conversational, like he was discussing the weather. "Dennis is going to lose, and when he does, everyone's going to remember whose side you picked." My mother stood at the sink the whole time and rinsed the same mug for what felt like 10 minutes, and didn't turn around once. Richard moved the carriage house clearing up to that Friday, 3 days out. A demolition and haul-off crew, not a careful one, just a dumpster and instructions to load anything that wasn't nailed down. Get whatever's personal out by Thursday night, he told me, not quite meeting my eyes, already halfway through the doorway. After that it's not really my problem what happens to any of it. I found out from a quiet, frightened text from a payroll clerk I barely knew, asked HR to start drafting language around my erratic behavior and a possible leave of absence. Not fired yet. Just paperwork, sitting ready, the way you keep a second set of keys in a drawer in case the first ones stop working. I told Meridian all of it, and for the first time since the photo he didn't have an immediate answer. Just tell me you're safe tonight, he wrote finally. The rest I can work with, I can't work with you not being safe. I'm safe, I typed back, which was true in the narrowest possible sense, and false in every sense that mattered. He didn't call me on it. I think he'd already decided that some lies you let a person keep telling themselves for exactly as long as they need to. I went up Thursday night with 2 duffel bags and no plan beyond saving what I could carry. I hadn't been back inside since the night it happened. The clocks were still running, all of them slightly out of sync, filling the room with a soft overlapping ticking that made my chest hurt before I'd even gotten the door open. I started with the tools, the ones stamped A and C weren't almost smooth, because some things you save on instinct before you save on logic. Then the file drawer, the one Richard called a waste of space, full of my father's invoices going back 18 years, his handwriting getting steadier and more sure of itself the further back you went. And then I found the folder I hadn't been looking for. It was pushed to the very back, behind a shoebox of spare mainspring barrels, a thin accordion file labeled, in my father's handwriting, just 2 words, Coastal, do not trust. Inside were invoices from a supplier I'd never seen him use before, dated across the last 8 months of his life, each one flagged in the margin with a small red question mark, the same way he used to mark a joist he didn't trust before he tore into a wall to check it. He'd been building, quietly alone, the exact case I'd stumbled into by accident 6 years later, and he'd run out of time before he ever got to finish it. I sat on the workshop floor with that folder in my lap and cried the way I hadn't let myself since the funeral. Then I got out my own files, every before photo I'd ever taken in that room, every timestamp going back years out of nothing but habit, and I found the water-stained photo from 2 winters ago exactly where I'd filed it. Dated 3 weeks before an insurance claim Richard had filed on that same structure, describing sudden, severe water damage requiring $40,000 in emergency restoration. My photo proved the damage had already existed, already been minor, already been handled by me personally for under $200, 3 weeks before he filed a claim describing it as sudden and catastrophic. Always shoot the before, nobody believes the after without it. I finally understood, sitting on that floor at midnight with my father's handwriting in my lap, exactly what he'd actually been trying to teach me all those years. I brought both folders to Dennis Ashworth myself, at 9 the next morning, in an office I hadn't set foot in since I was a little girl doing homework under my father's drafting table. Julian was there too, in person for the first time, taller than I'd pictured, quieter, more tired looking, watching me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for 2 days, he said, and I still don't have anything that sounds like enough. Then don't say anything yet, I told him. Help me finish this instead. The forensic accountant Dennis had already retained needed 6 hours with both folders to build a picture that went well past one bad invoice. Coastal Heritage Supply, it turned out, was registered to an LLC whose sole listed officer shared Richard's home address. Over 4 years, more than $600,000 had moved through invoices for materials that were never actually delivered, alongside 2 additional insurance claims filed against damage that was either pre-existing, minor, or invented outright. My trust, the 18% of the company that should have come to me outright on my 25th birthday, a birthday that had come and gone 11 months earlier without anyone in that house mentioning it once, had been quietly diluted through a series of capital calls Richard authorized as acting trustee, calls that existed only on paper, backed by nothing but Vanessa's signature on forms she'd never once been asked to actually read. When Vanessa found out how her name had been used, something in her face broke open that I'd genuinely never seen before. She didn't defend him. She sat very still for a long moment, and then she asked, in a voice I'd never once heard her use with me, whether she needed her own lawyer. She did, and she got one. And 3 weeks later she was the one who handed the auditors a second stack of forms she'd finally gone back and actually read. The open house happened on schedule in the middle of all of it, technically. Richard smiled for the donors and the city council, and the regional preservation reporter shook every hand twice, and nobody there had the faintest idea that 3 different lawyers already had his name in a filing somewhere. I didn't go. I'd spent 14 months earning that building with my own hands, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need his applause to know it. The emergency meeting happened 4 days after that, in the boardroom of the Whitfield Exchange building, the same building whose restoration got my name left off a newspaper article, cornice work and all, under a chandelier I'd personally rewired by hand 2 summers ago. The forensic accountant put the Coastal Heritage Supply paperwork on the screen beside my father's original flagged invoices from 6 years earlier, side by side, the same small red question marks visible in both, 20 years and 2 different handwritings apart. Richard tried the reasonable man voice anyway. He said the word context 4 times in 90 seconds. He said Emma's always struggled with follow-through, glancing at me like he expected the old fear to still be sitting there waiting to agree with him. It wasn't. Vanessa was the one who finally cut him off. Stop talking. It was the first time in 4 years I'd heard her call him that instead of Richard, and the first time it sounded like something closer to grief than loyalty. Your predecessor already caught you, Dennis said quietly, from the head of a table he hadn't sat at in 6 years. You just outlived him before he could do anything about it. You didn't outlive his daughter. 2 Savannah PD officers were waiting in the hallway when the meeting broke. Not for the fraud that would come from the district attorney's office in its own time, but for the protective order hearing that had quietly, finally come through that same morning, 6 days after I'd walked into the station and given Detective Ferris my statement. Richard's face, walking out past his own name still hanging fresh in that lobby, was the first honest thing I'd seen on it in 4 years. The board voted him out as trustee and CEO before lunch, citing the trust's fitness clause by name. Vanessa didn't say one word in his defense. My mother didn't either, though hers was a different silence, and I watched something in her finally crack open. 4 years too late to have stopped any of it, but maybe, just maybe, not too late to mean something now. 3 weeks later, the trucks went back to the paint shop. Ashworth and Calloway, gold letters, driver's side door, my father's version, my father's partner, restored the way you restore anything worth keeping. Find exactly what was worn away, and replace exactly that, and leave everything else alone. My mother moved into an apartment on the other side of Forsyth Park 2 weeks after the board meeting. She didn't ask me to help her pack, and I didn't offer, but she called the day she signed the lease and stayed on the phone with me for 11 minutes without either of us saying much of anything at all. It wasn't an apology. It was closer to a first draft of one. I decided that was allowed to be enough for now. I called Priya Anand for the first time in 2 years. The friend Richard had made just awkward enough to visit that she'd eventually stopped trying. She picked up on the first ring and said my name like it was a question and an answer at the same time. We're getting dinner Friday. I already know I'm going to cry into the breadbasket, and for the first time in a long time, I don't mind the idea of that at all. Julian flew in the following Thursday and stood in the doorway of the workshop, like he wasn't sure yet whether he'd been given permission to breathe. I'd pictured this moment 100 ways over 2 years online, and none of them had prepared me for how quiet it actually was. Just him crossing the room slowly, running his thumb once, carefully, along the last faint shadow of the bruise under my eye, like he needed to confirm for himself that it was actually healing and not just covered up. I should have called sooner, he said. The second you mentioned the tool stamps, honestly. I had a feeling and I sat on it. You called exactly when it mattered, I told him. I need you to believe that because I do. We ate takeout on the workshop floor that night, surrounded by clocks that finally, for the first time in longer than I could remember, all struck the hour within a second of each other. He asked if he could see the Vienna regulator, the one with the cracked glass my father never got around to fixing. I've been meaning to replace that glass for 6 years, I told him. Some things you fix. Some things you just decide to keep exactly as they were left to you. He didn't ask me which one this was, I think he already knew. Always shoot the before, nobody believes the after without it. I finally have both, and for the first time in my whole life the after actually belongs to me. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.